While the reptilian type of an alien is admittedly seldom seen, there does not seem to be a sufficient recurrence of this peculiar serpent-like species to warrant further study by UFO and alien abduction researchers. Along with the infrequent encounters with reptilians experienced by abductees, a strange kind of mythology has also grown up around the subject. A mythology that involves some of the most extreme and paranoid conspiracy theorizing currently available in the marketplace of fringe beliefs. In an attempt to gain some insight just into what these reptilian aliens are all about, UFO spoke to 4 different researchers and authors, all of whom differ a great deal in their understanding of the serpent race, but who nevertheless argue convincingly that something significant is going on that cannot be easily ignored. From the pragmatic abduction research of Dr. David Jacobs, to the folklore of Timothy Green Beckley, to the personal experiences of Beverly Trout, to the religious and sociological observations of Dr. Brenda Densler, the range of opinions is wide and profoundly deep. Timothy Green Beckley. Timothy Green Beckley has been an author, editor, and publisher of books and magazines on UFOs and the paranormal for more than 40 years. His publishing company, Inner Light Books Global Communications, offers hundreds of titles that deal with subjects like Nikola Tesla, non-human underground races, and conspiracy theory. At the outset, Beckley wants it known that he has a little faith in the fringe viewpoint of the reptilians as sexual sadists. For example, some of the abductees talk about having sex with serpent-like beings. Beckley said, "In fact, I remember being on a panel with Bud Hopkins several years ago in Minnesota, and one of the abductees on this panel was a middle-aged lady who claimed that the serpents were appearing in her home and performing rather lewd acts on her. But to me, stories of breeding serpents seem a bit ludicrous. I would have to have an awful lot of evidence," he continued, "to prove that long-tailed, hissing serpents of any size, shape, or description are coming here and having sex with humans. It seems like a bizarre fetish or fantasy to me. But that's not to say that some people don't believe it, because it does not seem to be a common thread that runs through the more abstract areas of UFO research today. There are even a number of websites that deal with this in explicit detail." Which leads to the subject of David Icke, one of the foremost researchers to popularize the serpent paranoia that continues to be an integral part of current conspiracy theory. Icke's books include Children of the Matrix and Freedom Road, and he has several videos available as well as being a frequent guest speaker on the conspiracy lecture circuit. In most of his books and videos, Beckley said he described these reptilians as operating behind the scenes and manipulating world politics. They use members of secret societies like the Freemasons and the Illuminati to do their evil bidding. Now, the way I understand Icke's take on reptilians is that they are interdimensional beings on a different vibrational level than we are, and they come here and possess human bodies, some of whom then have the capability of shape-shifting. There have even been reports of people, he continued, who have been at ceremonies, so-called black magic rituals in which members of various political hierarchies have been present, and they have seen these political figures purportedly turn into serpents. The Queen of England being one, and I think Dick Cheney being another. I'm sure that some people have seen George Bush turn into a demon. Some of these things are maybe not too far-fetched," Beckley said, laughing. "When you consider what's going on in the world today, in all fairness though, David Icke is a very articulate speaker, and he does make a good presentation. He almost makes it believable up to a point." Beckley also made reference to a Zulu chief and shaman named Credo Mutwa, whose tale of reptilians and their long-time presence in Africa offer a new perspective to those of us in the West. Credo says that the Zulu have known about the beings who can travel through space and time for thousands of years. Beckley said, "They arrived out of the sky, a race of people who were like lizards and who could change their shape at will. He believes that they have produced a powerful race of kings and tribal chiefs, and there are hundreds of fairy tales in which reptilian females assume the identity of a human princess in order to marry into the tribe and become powerful in the Zulu nation." Credo talks about different caverns in which the reptilians reside to this day, and how they frighten people, certainly when they are in their lizard form. They are supposed to be very horrific looking, bright red eyes and frightening glares, and they have the power to hypnotize and use mind control to their advantage. So they are presented as the ultimate evil in all of this. So is all of the conspiracy theory and folklore above just so much paranoia. Paranoia can be fun, Beckley replied. It can be escapism. And somebody's always going to come up with a theory about something. I don't think we should sweep it under the rug but we have got to use common sense as well. A lot of this does go over the line of common sense. If you are going to do research into this, go into the historical stories and the first-person accounts of some of the abductees today. But be very careful when it comes to drawing conclusions on this. When we start talking about serpents and reptilians, we are really walking on the wild side. There are a lot of evildoers right here, and we don't have to blame all of this on serpents. Dr. David Jacobs. For the past 18 years, Dr. David Jacobs has ranked as one of the top abduction researchers in the entire field. His book on the subject, Secret Life and the Threat, are considered definitive works of unimpeachable clarity and rationality. So what does he have to say about the reptilians? The reptilian, Jacob said, from what we can tell, does not participate in the standard abduction procedures with the regularity that the insect-like ones do or the grey aliens do. Reptilian is a subjective kind of image. In a sense, one person's reptilian is another person's really ugly person. So we do not really have a handle on exactly what a reptilian looks like that everybody can agree upon. We are dealing with a range of facial features primarily. Reptilians almost always scare people, he continued, whereas the other ones might not scare them to the degree that the reptilian ones do. So because of that fear factor, there's always a kind of subjective judgment about the quality of the reptilian's personality or essence. Now, do the reptilians want fear? We do not have a substantial amount of evidence suggesting that the reptilians do anything to engender fear. In other words, they don't attack people. They don't threaten people, at least in my experience with investigating them. In spite of the fact that the reptilians, probably because of their looks, often cause the subjective fear Jacobs describes, they are still just another part of the overall abduction package. They are all part of this program, he said. They are seen in the company of the insect-like ones, of the hybrids, and of the grey aliens. They are all working for the same goal. They are all on board on the same ships. They are all essentially doing the same thing. That's the bottom line. You are not dealing with a reptilian from another planet that have different agenda and are here for a different reason. You are still dealing with a mainstream part of the abduction phenomenon. It's only different in terms of the shape of the physiology of the being. Even among sincere experiencers, Jacob said, there is often confusion about whether they are seen an actual reptilian, especially in the abductees' first few hypnotic regressions. People tend to say things that aren't true, he explained. They confabulate although they don't realize it. They are not trying to lie or another like that, but they do it in characteristic areas. And the number of area is description of aliens. You have to always keep in mind that when they say, oh, this one looks like it's a reptilian, are they actually saying a reptilian at all? Now, if you have had 10 sessions with them and they say this one looks like a reptilian, that's a different story altogether. Then you can see that they have seen a reptilian. The fact is, though, it is uncommon. It's common enough that we do have a body of evidence for them. Jacob said he pays close attention to accounts of the reptilians when he feels he can trust the abductees' memories. When I find someone who says, this one looks like reptilian, I question them closely because I am interested in this. I need to know what role they play. I have no stake in them being there or not being there, but I do have a stake in finding out what is going on with them. So it attracts my attention when somebody says something like that. We are still learning a lot about the abduction phenomenon, and this is one of the areas that we wish to have had more knowledge of. Right now, though, it's still a little bit of guesswork for us. Beverly Trout. Beverly Trout has been the Iowa State Section Director for the Mutual UFO Network since 1995. In April of this year, she delivered a lecture on the reptilians at the Ozark UFO Conference in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, in which she spoke of her personal abduction experiences with the serpent beings. Trout explained when she underwent hypnosis in 1993, when the psychiatrist, who was also a MUFON member, reptilians were the farthest thing from her mind. She recalled being a child of around 12 or 13 in the 1940s back on her father's farm. My father had me working out in the field with him at a pretty early age, she began. In fact, I started to drive a tractor when I was about 9. One of the things I always did was to be out in the hayfields, driving a tractor with a hay rack on behind. On this particular day, there was a man up on the hay rack and my father was on the ground. At least that's my perception. I understand that perception does not always represent the actual, but that's my perception and that's all I have got to go with. I'm getting this through light hypnosis. this somewhat relaxed focus state. They are taking me on board and I am perceiving that my father is just standing there by the hay rack on the ground with the pitchfork in his hand, and he's just moving that pitchfork back and forth aimlessly. He didn't even know I was gone, apparently switched off. The guy up on the hay racks, he'd been switched off as well, from what I could ascertain. And they are taking me on board and they opened up an area that seemed to me that it was somewhat frontal, on the brain, because something that they already had in there, some device, I presume an implant of some sort. That there was a problem because there was swelling in the brain. They are tinkering around in there and they are introducing little coil. Then the swelling goes down and everything is back to normal. And in the midst of this perceived incident, I remember sitting in the chair in the psychiatrist's office, and for at least 15 or 20 seconds I was refusing to speak and say what I was seeing. Finally I said in a very weak voice, "Well, I guess I ought to say that there's a reptilian individual standing in the back and he is in charge." Now, they were greys, so apparently this reptilian was in charge of some kind of grey team. He was tall, well-built and clearly in charge. Then of course they are bringing me back and I am seeing myself just plodding across stubble in the hayfield and climbing on the tractor, and everything went back to normal. My dad began to get work done and the guy up on the rack, and nobody knew I had been gone. Trout's story seems to add support to the statements made earlier in this video by David Jacobs. The reptilian, while he appears to have a different physical makeup than the greys, does essentially take part in aspects of the standard abduction scenario, along with them, and functions no differently than the more familiar guises of the aliens. Trout said she frequently has dreams, which she considers to be the abduction experiences clouded over by screen memories, in which she finds herself surrounded on all sides by snakes. In her Eureka Springs lecture, Trout also recounted the story of a friend of hers who has had frequent experiences with reptilian aliens. This particular experience began when her friend, for whom she used the pseudonym Jack, had gone to bed with his significant other. Jack was awakened, Trout said, and saw a reptilian individual in the adjoining bathroom door. The reptilian started out of the bathroom door and headed for the side of the bed where Jack's bed partner was sleeping peacefully. Jack instantly sat up in the bed and pointed a finger to the door and telepathically shouted, "Stop, you are not allowed into this space." At this point, something apparently gave this particular reptilian pause. He stopped and retreated about 3 feet and kind of stood or hovered just inside the bathroom, as if he was watching and waiting to see whether Jack would be strong enough to prevent him from reaching his bed partner. And here's what I thought was an interesting thing. A thought stream permeated Jack's mind. Call out to the Archangel Michael. And instantly he did, silently, telepathically, but very succinctly, and very precisely stating the need for intervention and the action that he wanted. At this point, a beam of light energy entered the room, and from it, there came a sort of a shape holding a long rod of light that was at least 7 feet high from the floor of the ceiling, which then confronted the reptilian individual. Jack's perception was that the reptilian shrieked and then completely dissipated. The shape returned to the light beam and the beam retracted from the bedroom. Jack later told Trout, "Bev, I have had interactions with reptilians for years, and it's been okay. It hasn't been too scary, but I knew this particular individual meant no good." Trout went on to say that Jack's not going to lump all the reptilians into one single good or bad category. He's cognizant of the differences between individuals immediately. Jack and I got into a discussion of the Archangel Michael part of the episode and the pillar of light that seems to appear in response to his very urgent request. Was it in fact an angel of sorts, or could it have been some aspect of Jack himself that became activated, seemingly outside his physical self, yet perhaps stemming from his explicitly recognized need and his desire for action? As with most abduction narratives, one is left with more questions than answers. Trout reflected on her own ambiguous feelings about it all. "It's a kind of repulsion-fascination syndrome," she said. "This is the dichotomy that I know I am caught in the midst of, repulsed by the massive manipulation, the intrusive interaction, and yet so fascinated that we don't really want the aliens to go away. And I see this even in those who are out there too. Let's say, demonize the aliens. I don't think that even those abductees want the aliens to go away. As I said, it's a dichotomy, and it's not one that I'm necessarily proud of. You could even say, well, hey, where's our self-esteem? In a sense, we are manipulated But for some reason or another, we just don't want this presence to go away. Dr. Brenda Denzler. When Brenda Denzler earned her PhD in religious studies from Duke University, she wrote her dissertation about the UFO and alien abduction movements. The dissertation was eventually published in book form by the University of California Press in 2001 and is entitled The Lure of the Edge: Scientific Passions, Religious Beliefs, and the Pursuit of UFOs. In specific, Denzler said, it was about the ways that the UFO community, especially abductees, use science and religion as frameworks for trying to understand these experiences. When asked whether she had run across the reptilian phenomenon in her own research, Denzler said, it showed up to some extent. At that point in time in the history of the development of the idea, people were reporting mostly encounters with grey aliens. There were accounts of reptilian entities, but not as frequent. And the significance of the reptilian type versus the other types had not been really elaborated much at that point. This is in the early and mid-1990s. At that point, the idea of what it might mean to have an encounter with a reptilian alien had just not been elaborated. Since then, a different picture has begun to emerge, according to Denzler. I have read much more about them since then, she said. About people who believe that they have had encounters with the reptilians. The reptilians have taken on the status of the quintessential bad boys in the panoply of UFO entities. There are some people who have reptilian encounters and report them positively and say that the reptilians are getting a real bad crap. But in general, the idea is that the reptilians are nefarious characters. The conversation moved on to Denzler's view of the reptilian alien conspiracy theory. It's much easier to point to a person or a group of people, she said, and say, them they are the ones who did it. They knew full well at the outset what they were doing. They knew it was wrong. They had in mind to defraud all the rest of us or kill all the rest of us or engage in mind control or try to control the thinking of all the rest of us. They are absolutely evil. It's just much easier to do that than to think systematically and in terms of systems. And so rather than a close and careful application of the idea that there are conspiracies, which there certainly are, you get this kind of globalized application of the idea that there are conspiracies because it's easier. What the UFO community has done, in my opinion, it folded the idea of reptilian aliens into that whole conspiracy mindset. Meanwhile, there is a long tradition, at least in the West, that has always equated reptiles with evil. In the Judeo-Christian tradition at least, Denzler said, the image of the reptile has almost always been associated with satanic forces and evil forces, and if you want to speak in terms of Jungian archetypes, certainly for the West, the image of the reptile is one of the dark image, a shadow image, so that gets folded into the whole conspiracy idea. And what about some of the wilder claims made by the conspiracy theorists? The idea that the Queen of England is a reptilian shapeshifter. I have heard similar things, that key officials are really reptilians in disguise. Denzler said, well, if they are really there, and they are that powerful and that nefarious, then an equally interesting issue is why are they not prevailing? If they are reptilian aliens and they have all of this alien technology, which is presumably superior to ours, what's holding them back? Why aren't they more out there? But Denzler doesn't quite want to be seen as a debunker where the reptilians are concerned. It's not that I disbelieve that people have experiences, she said. And it's not that I disbelieve that there is some kind of entity or energy associated with this that we would call reptilian. That may very well be the case. I know people personally who say that they have had encounters with these kind of beings. But the way that the whole idea of the reptilian gets melded into a grand conspiracy theory that pretty much explains everything in history and everything in the present and focuses on individuals being the embodiments of evil, that's the part I find a lot harder to take 100% at face value. I think that in an overly simplistic way of looking at history and looking at current events, to say that the serpents are the bad guys and they are controlling all the bad things.
With so many conspiracy theories out there, it's hard to keep track of them all. Welcome to What We Know, where we try to uncover the histories and mysteries of the world by presenting all different theories out there, and the only narrative we push is this. Here's what we know, make up your own mind.
If you enjoy this video and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing to us and hitting the like button. Feel free to write a comment below and suggest which theory you want to see next. If you'd like to further support this channel, please consider joining. Our membership link will be found in the description box below. We appreciate your support, and as always, Thanks for watching.